You don't feel the cold at first. That's the strange part. You close your eyes somewhere between Belgium and sleep, and for a few seconds you're still back home, still warm, still somewhere that makes sense. And then your body remembers where it is, and the cold finds you all at once, not from one direction, but from everywhere, seeping up through the wooden boards beneath you, pressing in through the walls of mud on either side, dropping down from the slice of dark sky above your head. It's not the kind of cold that you can argue with. It doesn't care about your coat or your blanket, or the way you've pulled your knees up to your chest. It just takes what it wants, and what it wants is every last degree of warmth you have left. You open your eyes. The trench is still there. Of course it is. It's always still there. The year is 1916. The place is somewhere in France, though you've stopped thinking of it that way. It isn't France anymore. It isn't anywhere. It's just this. A slot cut into the earth, 6 feet wide, deep enough that you can stand upright if you're not too tall, stretching away in both directions until it bends out of sight. The walls are held together by wooden frames and sandbags and sheer determination. The floor is a series of wooden slats laid end to end, called duckboards, and the mud underneath them is a living thing, black and greedy, always trying to swallow whatever you put into it. Boots, equipment, hope. It takes all of them equally. The smell hits you next, and you realize with a dull kind of horror that you stopped noticing it yesterday, and now it's come back. It never really goes away. It's built from layers, the way a compost heap builds itself. Wet earth underneath everything, then smoke from a dozen small fires, then unwashed men and soaked wool, then the latrines dug 50 yards back, then something else beneath all of that, something sweet and wrong that you've learned not to think about too directly. There are bodies in no man's land. There have been bodies there for weeks. The ground between the two trench systems is nobody's territory and everybody's graveyard, and the men who fell there stay where they fell, because retrieving them would mean dying too. You shift against the wall and feel something move near your foot. You don't look down. You already know what it is. The rats here are enormous, grown fat on things that would make you sick to name, and they've been in these trenches longer than any soldier. They know the layout better than the engineers who designed it. They know where the food is kept and where the warmth collects and which men sleep deepest. The one near your foot decides you're not interesting enough and moves on, claws clicking softly on the duckboards as it disappears into the dark. Somewhere a few yards down the line, someone coughs. A wet, tearing sound that's been going on for 3 days now. Henderson. He came out of the last rotation with something settling into his chest, and the cold and the damp have fed it steadily ever since. You've watched men die from exactly that kind of cough, not from bullets or shells or gas, just from the slow work of this place on a human body that wasn't built for it. The trenches have 100 ways to kill you that have nothing to do with the Germans, and the British Army has names for most of them. Trench foot is the one everyone fears most. Stand in cold water long enough, and your feet begin to die. Not metaphorically. Actually die. The skin turns white, then grey, then the colour of old meat, and by that point you're already losing the battle. The army issues tins of whale oil and orders every soldier to rub it into his feet each day, and assigns a partner to check, because a man can't easily see his own feet down here, and might miss the signs until it's too late. 70,000 British soldiers will lose toes or feet to it before this war ends. Right now, you just know that your own feet are wet, and have been wet for so long that you can't remember what dry feels like, and you say a small, silent prayer every morning when you peel off your boots. The whistle comes before full light. A soft, short sound, nothing like the terrible whistles you've learned to dread, the ones that mean go over the top into the machine guns. This one means stand to, stand to arms, the twice daily ritual that opens and closes every day in the trenches. Dawn and dusk are the most dangerous hours. when the changing light gives cover to anyone wanting to advance. And so every man in every trench along the entire Western Front drags himself upright, fixes his bayonet, climbs onto the fire step, and watches. Every morning, every evening, rain or frost or fog. The routine doesn't care how tired you are. You haul yourself up. Your legs have gone half numb from the position you were sleeping in, and your back makes its feelings known clearly as you straighten. Around you in the grey half-dark, other shapes are moving. Thompson, Davies, young Perkins, who told the recruiting sergeant he was 19 and probably wasn't. The corporal moves down the line, counting heads, silent, efficient, the kind of man who was built for this, and you've never known whether to envy or pity him for it. You fix your bayonet. The blade locks into place with a sound you've heard so many times it lives in your hands without thinking. Then you ease your head up over the parapet, just far enough to see, pulling it back quickly, because the German snipers are patient men with excellent rifles, and they've been known to wait hours for exactly this kind of moment. Careless soldiers, curious soldiers, soldiers who forget themselves for 3 seconds too long. No man's land spreads out in the growing light. 250 yards of absolute ruin. Before the war, this was farmland, fields and hedges and small roads. Now it's something that belongs to no century and no human purpose. Every tree is a stump. Every dip in the ground is a crater filled with black water. The soil has been turned and turned again by artillery until it isn't really soil anymore, just a paste of mud and metal and things that used to be other things. Running through it in every direction, the wire. Miles of it, rusted and tangled, strung on stakes hammered into the mud, catching the faint light in 1,000 small points. The wire is why the war stopped moving. You can't cross it quickly, and while you're trying slowly, the machine guns do their work. Nothing moves out there today. The horizon gradually brightens, and the shapes in no man's land resolve from shadows into the specific devastation you've memorized by now. A length of broken parapet, a rusted helmet half buried in the mud, things you don't examine too closely. After perhaps 40 minutes, the order comes to stand down, and 9 out of 10 of you step off the fire step and allow your shoulders to fall from around your ears. The rum comes next. It arrives in a ceramic jar, distributed by the corporal into small brass caps, measured precisely, handed to each man who has to drink it immediately, right there, because otherwise it might be saved or traded, and the army wants to make sure the warmth goes where it's intended. It burns on the way down and spreads through your chest like a small coal. For perhaps half a minute, the cold backs off. That half minute is worth more than you can explain to someone who hasn't stood on a frozen fire step in the dark, waiting to be shot. Breakfast is whatever could be cooked in the limited safety of a brazier, a small metal container, burning scraps of fuel just behind the front line. Today, someone's managed bacon. The smell is almost unbearable in its normality. It belongs to kitchens, to Sunday mornings, to a version of the world that exists somewhere beyond all this. You eat fast. Everyone eats fast out here, partly from hunger, partly from the knowledge that something can always interrupt. A shell, an order, a sniper finding his range. The hard biscuits that come alongside the bacon could genuinely break a tooth, so you soak yours in tea that is weak and bitter and barely warm, and tastes faintly of whatever container it was carried in. It doesn't matter. It's hot. Hot liquid in your body is a luxury that registers somewhere deep and animal. The tea comes with an unspoken truce. There are hours each morning when neither side shoots at the other during meals. Nobody arranged this. No officer signed a document or issued an order. It evolved naturally from the shared reality that everyone on both sides needs to eat, and perhaps from the knowledge that the men in the other trench are going through something very similar to what you're going through. You don't talk about it. Acknowledging it feels dangerous somehow, like it might break the spell. After breakfast, shaving. This gets raised eyebrows from new arrivals. The idea that personal grooming is compulsory in a place where men are dying of cold and disease and enemy action. But the reason isn't about appearances. The gas masks don't seal against stubble. A gap of even a few millimeters between rubber and skin means chlorine or phosgene can find a way in. And by the time you realize your mask has failed, it's already too late. So you shave every day without exception, using the dregs of your morning tea as shaving water once it's cooled enough, dragging a straight razor that could use sharpening across a face that looks back at you from a small square of polished metal. The face in that metal is yours, but it's been changed. You're 20 years old, and you look 10 years older. The eyes especially. Something behind them has shifted to a place it didn't come from. The platoon sergeant arrives mid-morning for inspections. Weapons, equipment, the state of the trench walls. He moves through the section with the kind of authority that comes from having survived when others haven't. From knowing this environment well enough to spot in seconds the things that will get someone killed. Your rifle passes. You cleaned it the night before, even though your hands were shaking, and you could barely see straight from exhaustion, because a dirty rifle jams and a jammed rifle gets you killed, and by now that equation is so deeply lodged in you that skipping the cleaning would feel like choosing to die. The Lee Enfield. 10 rounds in the magazine, bolt action, accurate and reliable if you maintain it. You've fired it in actual combat perhaps 20 times. The rest of the time you carry it, clean it, sleep with it across your knees, and check it so often that the checking has become a kind of prayer. You know every mark on it, every worn patch of metal. It could be dark, you could be half asleep with mud in your eyes, and your hands would still know exactly what to do with every component of this weapon. The trenches teach things in ways that don't require thinking. They just install them, whether you want them or not. The middle of the day arrives with food carried up from the rear through the communication trenches, those long, narrow passages that run at right angles to the front line and connect the fighting positions to the supply routes. The men who bring the food move quickly and quietly, trying not to draw attention, because enemy observers are always watching, and a group of men carrying containers through a trench is exactly the kind of target an artillery battery enjoys. Today it's stew, which is generous as a description. There's warmth to it, and there are things floating in it that might be vegetables, and that combination is enough. You eat with whatever you have, spoon if you're lucky, bread if there is any, fingers otherwise. Nobody cares. Dignity is something you left somewhere behind the lines months ago. Then mail call, and the whole trench changes. Letters from home, packages, the small lifeline that connects you to a world you're trying to believe still exists. Davies gets 3 letters in quick succession and sits with them held against his chest for a moment before reading a single word. Perkins gets a package from his mother, opens it with hands that have stopped shaking long enough for this, and inside there is a cake, dense and dark and slightly crushed from the journey, baked with whatever she could manage under rationing. He looks at it for a long moment, and then looks up, and without a word starts breaking pieces off and handing them around. That's how it works here. Someone gets something good, everyone gets something good. It's not generosity exactly. It's more fundamental than that. It's the understanding that in a place this stripped down, holding anything back from the men beside you makes no sense at all. Your name doesn't come up. It doesn't always. Your mother writes when she can, which isn't often. You don't hold it against her. What would you write back anyway? Everything's fine. The food is improving. I am well, and the weather is pleasant. All lies, every word, but the only kind you can offer. What you see and do and smell and feel in this place exists in a language that has no translation into anything a letter home could carry. The afternoon is long and mostly empty. The boredom is the thing nobody tells you about before you arrive. You expect the fear. You expect the noise and the danger and the constant proximity to death. What you don't expect is the hours and hours of absolutely nothing, sitting against a mud wall in a hole in the ground, staring at more mud while the minutes refuse to pass. The fear is still there underneath, a cold, constant weight somewhere behind your sternum, but layered over the top of it is this suffocating tedium that has its own way of wearing you down. Veterans will tell you the war is 9/10 boredom, and 1/10 the kind of terror that turns your legs to water. Both parts damage you. The boredom just does it more slowly. Men fill the time with whatever they can find, writing letters, even without news to fill them. Cards, dice, the same stories told so many times everyone knows the punchlines before they come. Someone 3 sections down plays a mouth organ in the evenings, old songs from before the war, and the sound travels through the trench in a way that does something strange to your chest. Thompson carves things from spare wood, small figures of animals, cups and spoons. Perkins draws, quick pencil sketches of the men around him, the trench walls, the sky above. You've seen men write poetry out here, dark and extraordinary poetry that tries to put into language something that language keeps insisting it can't hold. There's a magazine called the Wipers Times. It started when a unit found an old printing press in a bombed-out building near Ypres, which everyone pronounces Wipers because it's easier. They got the machine working and began publishing their own paper, full of jokes and poems and mock advertisements and commentary on the war with a kind of dark humor that makes you laugh and feel vaguely sick at the same time. When a copy finds its way to your section, it passes through every set of hands and leaves them slightly lighter than before. That's the value of it. Not the news, not the information, just the proof that the human need to find something funny about existence continues to function even here. Evening stand to mirrors the morning. Back onto the fire step as the light fades, bayonets fixed, eyes scanning no man's land while the sun drops behind the German lines and the world turns orange and purple in a way that would be beautiful somewhere else. You've stopped noticing beauty out here. You notice angles and distances and what might be movement in that patch of shadow near the wire. After the allotted time, stand down again and the darkness comes properly and a different kind of work begins. Night in the trenches is when things actually happen. All the maintenance and construction that would draw fire in daylight gets done under cover of darkness. Sandbags need filling and stacking. Wire needs checking and repairing. Supplies need carrying from the communication trenches to the front positions. All of it done by feel in total darkness. No lights, no sound above the necessary minimum, because sound carries at night in ways that invite machine gun fire. Tonight, your section draws sandbag duty, and you work for hours, filling and tying and passing, the mud cold and heavy in your hands, the cold air finding every gap in your clothing. It's miserable work, and it's important work, and those two things are true of nearly everything out here. But there's worse work than sandbag filling. There's wire repair. When the artillery damages the belts of barbed wire in front of the trenches, someone has to go out and fix them. In the dark, into no man's land, crawling on hands and knees through ground that holds the remains of months of fighting, through the mud and the shell craters, and the wire that will find you whether you see it or not. Carrying fresh coils of barbed wire and the tools to string it, trying not to make a sound, because sound brings flares, and flares bring machine guns, and machine guns end things very quickly. Thompson went out last week for wire repair. He came back 2 hours late with his uniform torn in a dozen places, and his hands bleeding from where he'd grabbed wire in the dark without meaning to, and he sat against the trench wall without speaking for the rest of the night. The next morning, he told you about lying face down in a shell crater full of water when a flare went up, about pressing himself as deep into the mud as he could and holding his breath while the light blazed overhead and the shadows moved around him. About the long crawl back, every second expecting the shot that would mean someone had seen him. Even that isn't the worst thing you can be asked to do in the darkness. The worst is raiding. When the corporal announces a trench raid, a particular silence falls over the section. Not the comfortable silence of men at rest. The silence of men thinking through everything that could go wrong and finding the list is very long. The preparation is careful and strange. You strip off anything that might catch or rattle, buttons that could clink against equipment, tags that might knock together, anything that carries sound. Then someone produces a tin of burnt cork, and you smear it across your face and hands until you're dark on dark, something not quite human-shaped gathering in the candlelight of the dugout. The weapons for this work are not rifles. Rifles are too long for the close quarters of an enemy trench, too slow to reload. Instead, there are clubs, short and heavy, sometimes weighted with metal, knives, entrenching tools with their blades sharpened to an edge, small round grenades designed to be thrown into confined spaces and let off in a crack of noise and metal. You go over the parapet in silence and begin to crawl. No man's land from the inside is different from how it looks from the parapet. From the fire step, it's a landscape. From inside it, crawling through it with your face 6 inches from the ground, it's a collection of immediate obstacles. A ridge of mud, a coil of wire that appears from nowhere in the dark, a crater rim that drops away under your hands. The smell is worse at ground level, closer to the ground where things have soaked in. You learn very quickly to move slowly and to test each handhold before you put weight on it, because the ground out here is not reliable, and what feels solid can turn out to be something else entirely. A flare goes up, white and blazing, drifting down on its small parachute, turning the whole landscape into sharp black shadows. You flatten instantly, face down, arms pressed to your sides, and don't breathe. The light moves slowly over you. You can feel it on the back of your neck like a physical thing. Every instinct is screaming, but your body stays absolutely still, because stillness is the only option, and movement means the machine guns wake up, and that's the end. The flare burns out. The darkness returns, deeper than before because your eyes were adjusted, and now they aren't. You wait. You count. You continue crawling. The German wire. Someone beside you produces cutters and begins working strand by strand, the wire snapping softly as each cut is made, through the gap, into the enemy trench, and then everything becomes very fast and very close and very terrible. You don't remember the details clearly afterward. Nobody does. The mind has ways of softening what it can't process. There are shapes in the darkness, voices raised in alarm, the wet crack of a club connecting with something, a grenade going off in a confined space with a sound that isn't loud but is complete. And then you're crawling back, faster than you came, and the parapet of your own trench appears, and hands reach down to pull you over, and you collapse onto the duck boards, breathing so hard you can't speak. The rum comes around after raids. Extra portions. You drink yours and it doesn't help the way it usually does. Thompson is sitting against the wall looking at his hands, turning them over and back, examining them as though they belong to someone he's just meeting. Perkins is very quiet in the corner, knees drawn up, that position you've come to recognize as what the men around you do when they need to be small for a while. You don't talk about what happened out there. Some things in this war exist only where they happened, and bringing them back into the light would cost more than any of you have left to spend. 3 nights after the raid, Collins breaks. You hear him before you find him, a sound coming from somewhere down the trench that doesn't belong to anything recognizable, high and continuous and ragged, like something that stopped being a human voice partway through and became something more basic than language. You follow the sound and find him in a dugout, pressed into the far corner, knees against his chest, arms wrapped over his head, and his eyes are open, but they aren't seeing the dugout. Whatever they're seeing isn't here. The corporal tries to reach him by voice, then louder, then almost shouting his name directly into his ear. Nothing. Collins is somewhere else entirely, living through something that has him completely, and nothing in the present can pull him back. The stretcher bearers come, and they strap him down, and they carry him off down the communication trench, and the sound fades as the distance increases, and eventually there's nothing. Silence heavier than the kind that came before. Shell shock. The doctors have a name for it, though the name describes a theory they've mostly abandoned by now. What's actually happening, what nobody yet has words for, is that a human mind can hold a certain volume of horror before the architecture starts to give way, and the trenches operate at a level well above that volume every single day. The symptoms arrange themselves differently in different men. Some shake, constant uncontrollable tremors that start in the hands and spread outward, that make eating impossible, writing impossible, holding a rifle impossible. Some go blind or deaf without any physical damage to the relevant organs. The eyes work perfectly, the ears work perfectly, but the information those organs are sending has become unbearable, and somewhere between the sense and the consciousness, a door closes. Some men lose the ability to speak. You can see it on their faces, see the lips moving without sound, see the frustration in their eyes as the voice that should carry the words simply doesn't come. 80,000 British soldiers will be diagnosed with this condition before the war ends. And the treatment, when treatment comes, is sometimes worse than the condition it's meant to cure. Electric shocks applied to mute soldiers to force their voices back. The theory being that if you make the symptom more painful than what caused it, the mind will choose differently. It's medieval. It happens in modern hospitals with modern doctors who simply don't know what else to do, because the thing they're treating is new and the medicine hasn't caught up. The men whose minds break and who then refuse orders face something worse than hospitals. 266 British soldiers will be shot by firing squad during this war, not by the enemy, by their own army, for the crime of being so damaged by what this war has done to them that their bodies refuse to continue walking toward their own deaths. The families get letters, died in action, died of wounds, never the truth, which surfaces only decades later when records are opened and the distance of history makes honesty possible. Billy hasn't said much since Collins left. He's sitting against the trench wall in that small position, arms around his knees. You settle beside him. Don't say anything for a while. Just sit. Eventually he speaks. That could be any of us. Yes. How do you know it won't be? You don't. That's the only honest answer. You don't know what separates the men who hold together from the men who come apart. Whether it's something inside them, some constitution of the spirit that some people have and others don't, or whether everyone has a threshold, and it's simply a matter of how much time and how much horror, and whether the threshold gets reached before the war ends. Maybe Collins just ran out of room. Maybe you all will eventually. Maybe survival is just a question of whether the war ends first. You don't say all of this. You just say, one day at a time, and mean it as plainly as anything you've ever said. The days continue in their rotation. 4 days in the front trenches, where every hour carries the possibility of immediate death, and the fire step is your horizon, and the sky is a strip of pale nothing above the sandbags. Then 4 days in the support lines, slightly behind the front, still within range of artillery, but with room to breathe, room to move, something approaching sleep that goes deeper than the desperate half-doze of the front. Then 8 days in reserve, which means something close to real life. Hot food that arrives hot, a chance at a bath, actual hot water with soap in a building with a roof, sleep in something resembling a bed, letters written and read in something approaching peace. The day your section rotates back from the front line, the change is physical. You feel it in your shoulders, in your jaw, in the particular muscles behind your eyes that have been clenched for 4 days against the work of watching for snipers and listening for shells and being permanently ready for everything. As you move down the communication trenches away from the front, those muscles begin, slowly, to release. Not completely, not even close, but enough to notice. Billy nearly falls asleep standing up in the support trench. He catches himself on the wall, blinks, grins for the first time in days. Thompson is already talking about the bath, describing in unnecessary detail the specific pleasure of hot water on skin that has been cold for so long it's forgotten what warm feels like. Even Thompson, who doesn't speak much anymore after the wire repair and the raid, and Collins, is using words again. The new men coming forward to relieve your section pass you going the other way through the narrow trench, and you see yourselves from 6 months ago in their faces, the slightly too bright eyes, the equipment that's still clean in places, the way they hold their rifles, properly according to training, not yet adapted to the specific demands of trench survival. One of them, young, probably lying about his age, catches your eye, and you just nod and keep moving, and he nods back, and you both know you've passed something between you that neither of you can name. 8 days in reserve is not long, but it contains things that become enormous in the context of the front. A bath is one. You queue for it in a building that was once a farmhouse, waiting your turn for a large tub of water that by the time it reaches you is neither fresh nor particularly warm. But none of that matters, because it is hot water, and you lower yourself into it, and the heat finds the cold in your bones and begins, slowly, to argue with it. Letters get written properly in reserve, longer things, more considered, still full of the same careful lies. Everything is fine. I am well. The food is better lately. You tell them the things you can, which are small things, observations about the weather and brief descriptions of the men around you. You don't tell them about Collins. You don't tell them about the raid. Old George sits beside you one evening in the reserve, pipe going, the relative quiet of a sector that's not actively being shelled, and he tells you about a Christmas, not this one coming, the one 2 years ago, 1914, the first winter of a war everyone had promised would be finished by now. They'd been fighting since August, he says. By December they were exhausted, both sides, settled into positions that weren't moving and killing each other daily for ground that could be measured in yards. And then Christmas Eve came, and something happened that he still isn't entirely sure how to explain. Singing. It started with singing from the German side. Carols, recognizable tunes, even if the words were different. And then men on his side began singing back, and for a few extraordinary minutes, both trenches were singing the same songs in different languages in the dark on either side of no man's land. Christmas morning, he looked over the parapet and saw German soldiers standing on top of their trench, not carrying weapons, just standing, waving. And someone near him stood up, then another, and then he stood up too, with his legs shaking, and his every instinct screaming that this was wrong and he was about to die, and walked out into no man's land. The German who met him halfway was about his age, shook his hand, said Merry Christmas in very good English. Firm grip, warm hand. A real person standing where a monster was supposed to be. They traded things. Cigarettes for German sausage, buttons for badges, showed each other photographs of families back home. A young German soldier showed him a picture of a girl, kept saying her name like a prayer. George showed his own wife's picture. The German said beautiful, and they understood each other completely, without needing more words than that. They buried the dead together that day. Men who'd been lying in no man's land for weeks, because retrieving them had meant dying. On Christmas Day, both sides walked out and dug graves side by side and said whatever words seemed right over men who'd been enemies and were just men now in the cold ground. It wasn't tidy, it wasn't ceremonial, but it was something. Someone produced a football. They played in no man's land, British against Germans, goals marked by helmets pushed into the frozen earth, the pitch full of craters and frost. Nobody kept score that mattered. They were just playing, just people playing a game in a field, which is one of the most ordinary things humans do, made extraordinary by what the field had been before and what it would be again after. The truce lasted through the next day in most places, George says. But then the orders came from both sets of generals. No more. Court-martial for anyone caught talking to the enemy. The men in command had understood the danger immediately, that if the men on the ground stopped hating each other, they might stop fighting, and without the fighting, the whole vast machinery of war would have nothing to run on. So it ended. Both sides went back to their trenches, and the next day the shooting started again. Men who had shaken hands tried to kill each other. Men who had looked at photographs of each other's families aimed rifles at those families' sons. Who fired first, you ask? He shakes his head. That's the thing nobody talks about. The going back. Because one of them had to make the decision to pick up a rifle and aim it at a man whose name he knew, whose handshake he could still feel. And whoever that was, on whichever side, that moment must have been the heaviest moment of the entire war. The reason he told the story, he says, is Christmas is in 2 days, and you should know it happened. That in the middle of all this, ordinary men chose differently for one day, that the people in the other trench are just people, that you can know that and still be a soldier, and maybe knowing it is what makes you something different from the war itself. He moves off into the dark, and you sit with what he said for a long time. Billy is half asleep beside you. Murphy is somewhere nearby, writing his 49th or 50th letter to his girl, keeping count. The guns are distant tonight, someone else's problem for once. A low rumble like weather somewhere far away. You think about the German soldiers in their trench right now. Cold, probably. Tired. Waiting for the same rotation, the same relief, the same small mercies of a bath and a hot meal, and one night of sleep that goes all the way down. Writing their own letters home full of their own careful lies. Feeding their own rats. Listening to their own harmonica player somewhere down their own line. Just men. Just this. The whole enormous catastrophe reducing itself, at this distance and in this quiet, to the simple fact of men in holes in the ground trying to live through one more day. You close your eyes. Tomorrow will bring whatever it brings. Another rotation eventually. Another 4 days at the front. The fire step and the wire and the snipers and the rum measured out in a brass cap. Another round of foot inspections and weapon cleaning and standing in the dark, waiting for things that might or might not come. The same food, the same cold, the same letters from home that try to reach across the distance and mostly can't quite manage it but try anyway, which is something. But that's tomorrow. Tomorrow is far enough away that it might as well be another country. Right now there's just this, the quiet, the men around you who have become the closest thing to home that exists in the world right now. The distant guns rumbling like a storm that never quite arrives. The cold that you've learned to live with because you had no other option. The small particular warmth of being still, being safe enough, being here. You let yourself sink towards sleep, not the desperate surveillance of the front line, one ear always up, one part of your brain always watching. Actual sleep, dark and deep and full. Your body takes it like water after a long thirst, like warmth after the cold that has been your constant companion for so long. The war is still out there. It will be there in the morning, and the morning after, and the morning after that. It will find you again, and take what it takes, and ask what it asks, and you will give it what you can, because that's the only answer that keeps you moving forward. But in this moment, just this one, it's far enough away that you can breathe, far enough that you can feel something that isn't fear or cold or the specific exhaustion of surviving, something almost like rest, something almost like peace, and you hold on to it for as long as it lasts, for exactly as long as it lasts.